parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland, and fairly smartly spreading now into parts of northern England too. It's a fairly lively weather front, so some quite heavy bursts of rain, and it'll push into parts of North Wales, northwest England by the end of the morning. Behind that, brighter skies for eastern Scotland, plenty of showers for western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further south, 1 or 2 showers, but much of East Anglia and the southeast will be dry for most of the day. Another pretty mild day here as well, despite the breeze 18 or 19. But this narrow band of rain pushes across the Midlands, southwest England later on. Not lasting too long, but it could be pretty intense, and it will be around across East Anglia and the southeast for this evening's rush hour. So just bear that in mind if you're heading away this Friday evening. It does clear through, and then many places having clear spells tonight. There'll be some showers keeping going in western Scotland and some coming in from the Irish Sea into northwest England. But the winds ease off overnight as well. That will allow it to turn quite chilly, actually, a colder night than the one just gone. We're down into single figures for most to start the weekend. So a fresh start on Saturday, but by and large a sunny start. There will be through the day a few showers coming into western Scotland, maybe the odd one for Northern Ireland, northwest England too, but actually for most places looking like a decent day tomorrow with sunny spells for the majority, and temperatures after a chilly start getting up to about average come the afternoon, generally into the teens. So the weekend mostly starting dry and fine, and certainly for most of England and Wales it will stay that way into Sunday as well. But we are looking at a change with outbreaks of rain coming into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales
And Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
News Channel.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning. This is Friday Morning with me, Esther McVeigh, and Philip Davis, and we've got a great show lined up for you to finish off your week.
We've got cracking debates, discussion, and we'll be giving you all the top stories from across the world in 80 seconds. All of that after these headlines with the ever so wonderful Rhiannon.
Thank you, Philip. It's just gone 10 o'clock. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The government has opened a new licensing round for oil and gas exploration in the North Sea, the first since 2019. Nearly 900 locations are being offered for exploration, and as many as 100 licences could be granted. It's in a bid to encourage production of new oil and gas supplies as quickly as possible. The Business Secretary says it'll boost the UK's economy, energy security and support skilled jobs. Climate Minister Graham Stewart told GB News it's good for the environment.
It's also good for the environment because oil and gas produced in the UK has much lower emissions around its production than does the stuff that we import from abroad. So replacing imports with UK-produced oil and gas while nonetheless maintaining our legally obliged trajectory to net zero in 2050 is a win all round for the country, and I'm delighted to see this announcement today.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has ruled out launching an energy-saving public information campaign. That's despite warnings planned blackouts could hit the UK this winter if power plants are unable to source enough gas to keep running. It's understood the Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg supports the £15 million campaign. It would see households given advice like turning off radiators in empty rooms. The Times reports the idea was blocked by Number 10. The US president says the world is facing the biggest threat of nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago. Joe Biden says Russia's president wasn't joking when he threatened to use nuclear weapons after suffering setbacks in Ukraine. It follows a warning from Vladimir Putin that he'd use all means necessary to protect Russian soil, which he says now includes the 4 annexed Ukrainian regions. Thailand is mourning the death of at least 34 people, including 23 children, some as young as 2, following yesterday's massacre at a nursery. Government buildings are flying flags at half-mast, and the first funeral's been held for some of the victims. Police say the attacker, Panya Kamrab, had been discharged from the force last year and just hours earlier had appeared in court on drugs charges. He also killed his wife and child before taking his own life. The motive for the attack is not yet known. The French president says he hopes relations between the UK and the EU have entered a new phase after Brexit. Emmanuel Macron was responding to comments by Prime Minister Liz Truss describing him as a friend. The two leaders have met for talks in Prague at the inaugural summit of the European Political Community. In a joint statement, they announced a renewed bilateral agenda and agreed to hold a UK-France summit next year. The UK and Ireland have said they'll work to try and resolve the stalemate over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly met his Irish counterpart Simon Coveney last night, with the pair discussing their mutual desire for action. The first bilateral meeting between the UK and Ireland since Liz Truss became Prime Minister will be followed by the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference later. The average house price fell slightly last month by 0.1%. That's down from a record high in August. Figures from Halifax also show the annual rate of house price growth slowed to 9.9% in December. That's down from 11.4% in August. The average cost of a property in the UK is now just under £294,000. A 14-year-old boy has been charged with murder following the fatal stabbing of another teenager in Gateshead. Tomasz Oleszak, also 14, was found with serious injuries near the Springwell estate on Monday evening. He died in hospital in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Northumbria Police say the teenager, who can't be named for legal reasons, is appearing at Newcastle Magistrates Court this morning. He's also been charged with attempted wounding and possession of a bladed article. And Avanti West Coast has been given a 6-month extension to operate along the Key Rail line, but has been told it needs to drastically improve its services. The company, which holds the licence along the London to Glasgow route, has struggled to maintain services due to a shortage of drivers. Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham has called for the firm to be stripped of its contract unless it improves. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Esther and Philip.
Good morning. This is Friday morning on GB News with me, Esther McVeigh, and Philip Davis on your TV, radio and online. And we've got a busy and brilliant show for you today. Everything you need to know.
We'll be chewing through the highlights and the lowlights of the Tory party conference and to discuss the new political honours list too.
Who owns our roads? We've got a spicy debate lined up for you today. One of many in our new show. Are cyclists overzealous or are drivers too careless? Let us know what you think. Don't forget, you can email us on that.
One dating app came under fire for offering singles to find someone to split the energy bills with. Are tough times changing the very dynamic of dating? We'll be discussing that with a relationship expert.
We have all of that coming up and much more across the programme, and you can get in touch with your views as usual on gbviews@gbnews.uk.
We're delighted to be joined by Philip Blond, philosopher and former advisor to Prime Minister David Cameron for the full 2 hours today. Welcome, Philip.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So let's take a look back at the party conference there. What were the highlights? What were the lowlights?
I think the highlights were the lowlights, if I can put it like that. This is a party that is in real trouble. It's in real trouble because its offer isn't welcomed by its own voters and by the public. If you look at the British Social Attitudes Survey, which is the most comprehensive survey of British attitudes in 2021, which is the latest data, only 6% of all voters favour cutting expenditure on public services and cutting taxes. If you go to Tory voters, yes, the percentage is higher by 1%. It's 7%. So people do not want what the Prime Minister is offering. And what you have really is a libertarian ideology that's radically out of touch, not just with the country as a whole, but with its own voters. The Tory voters have changed radically since Brexit. Brexit, the elections of May and Johnson, brought lots of working class, Labour voting supporters in the north and in marginal areas that wanted change. And they don't want a smaller state, they want a state that works. Actually, the evidence shows that they're prepared to throw whatever money it takes to have an NHS where you can get...
But I think you said the key word there. They want something that works.
Yes,
that doesn't mean bigger, that doesn't mean smaller, that doesn't mean costing more. It means that works. And the Conservative Party's always been the party for value for money. So, has it been bad communications? Is it because she's been too ideological? Is it what Nadine Dorries said in some of her conversations and tweets, that she's lurched to the right? What is it? Is it just bad comms, or has there been a lurch to the right?
I think there's no understanding that what their voters need a functioning state. There's not been a programme of state reform and reform of public services really since May, and Cameron's programme really was overtaken by austerity. All the Conservatives have done is cut. They haven't reformed. We've got a police service that doesn't police anymore. We've got impossible to get doctor's appointments. We're in a situation where if you're in a poor area, your education is similarly poor. What we have, as
Do you think, though, go on, Phil.
Well, what I was interested, Philip, was that, you said that the voters don't want low taxes, they don't want this sort of libertarian thing. You could have made the same case, I guess, back in 1981 about Margaret Thatcher when she had a very unpopular budget. She was massively behind in the polls, that the public didn't want what she was offering. But as it turned out, what she was offering worked. And when it worked, people did want it then because they saw that it had worked. So presumably Liz Truss's argument is, well, they might not want it because they haven't seen anything like this. We've just had this sort of more and bigger state and everyone thinking the state can do more and more. If Liz Truss's plan works, which she thinks it will do, then maybe the public attitude to that will change. And that's really, isn't that what leadership's about, leading rather than following?
I think that's true, but let's be clear, Mrs Thatcher won because of the Falklands War. And the working of Thatcherism worked in the south, and it worked for the southeast, but it didn't work in the north, which kind of hard-baked Labour voting populations in the north.
Are you saying her only popularity was the Falklands War?
No, I think that pushed. I think that pushed her over the line. It's not clear without the Falklands that she would have won that election. What I'm trying to say is, you're right. If it works, things turn around. But what we are faced now is you've got to get from kind of where you are to when it works. And it's not at all clear that cutting personal taxes in the way they're doing it will promote the type of growth that we need. And I think that's a really open question. Now, what I like about the Prime Minister is the fact that we at last are trying a clear set of principles. And she's also adaptable. She's also in favour of, when she was in other ministries, of things like devolution. So I think she's open to ideas that can be transformative. And I like the growth plan, the enterprise zones. These are all very good ideas. But what you have is no idea. I'm sorry to repeat, but this is crucial. You also have her speaking about opening up to migration. This is not the Brexit promise.
And this is why I ask, is it about the communications? Because what she was sort of saying is, Brexit was about controlling immigration, in control. Do we need these people or don't we need these people? Do we need, for a certain amount of time, people to help working on farms? Do we need people for, IT? So it was to cut back open borders, but to be in control. So that's why I asked you, is it what she's saying's wrong, or is it just the way she's saying it? Because lots of people do agree with the policies. They just feel she's done a very bad, her and Kwasi, a very bad communications pitch, which could end up killing off some of those policies, which were good policies.
Well, I think it's both. And I think the policy mix is confused. And it's confused for our own electorate because we have no agendas around the things that they care about. Brexit was a vote to control migration, but the reality is, post-Brexit, migration has increased and we're getting more migration from the rest of the world than migration from Europe. And then what the Prime Minister has spoken about has been much more liberal on migration. So none of this is what people voted for, and what people voted for is they want economic and social security. They've been marginalised by progressive culture and marginalised by progressive economics. And what we have on offer is progressive culture and progressive economics.
Phil, we talked about, didn't we, or you talked about, has she tried to do too much in a small space of time?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder about that, whether, a radical change, you need a full parliament to do that. You can't just cram it all into 2 years. It seems to me that may be part of the problem. I just wondered, obviously you were at the conference, Philip, you were having conversations with people. Lots of speculation about whether Liz Truss can survive as Prime Minister. What was the sense that you got from the conversations you were having at the conference? Do you think she'll survive and see it through to the next election?
Well, here's the rub. I spoke to a lot of MPs, and the MPs recognise we're in serious trouble. The car is heading towards the brick wall with a foot down on the accelerator, right? And everyone in the car thinks they're going to die. So then the question is, can we change the driver when we're going at high speed? And people don't know. They think that, it's a question of immovable force, irresistible force meets a movable object.
At the moment, it seems that some people on the back seats at the moment feel that they can arrest the control of the car from the driver.
Well, they want something different from the Prime Minister because the present offer looks like heading for electoral suicide. If you look at her polling, she's polling worse than many pollsters have ever recorded from
I've got some of those polls there, but it was before her speech, and it was also before she stopped the 45p tax rise. So you're right, minus 59, Boris was minus 53, Corbyn's at his worst, minus 55. But that was an old poll.
And we're going to be looking at an exclusive GB News poll later, which
with you,
which we'll want you to comment on as well. So we'll probably we might save you up. For
the polling for the
original polling.
But the gossip on the corridors were, if you had to take a rough poll of what you spoke to, her staying or going from what you was...
I think that they can't imagine her going, but they can't imagine her staying. And I think that...
Isn't there a song? Should I stay or should I go now?
I think that's the situation where most MPs currently are, and they don't quite know what to do.
Philip, thank you very much. We'll be hearing from you throughout the course of the show. Now, over 10,000 jobs could be created in Nottinghamshire during the development of the world's first commercial nuclear fusion power plant.
The coal-fired site at West Burton was picked for the conversion with the promise of £200 million investment and billions more to come for the future economy. Our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, has more.
For half a century, the Midlands has been the source of much of Britain's energy. Now it will guide the world into a future of clean electricity. West Burton in Nottinghamshire has been picked for the first fusion power station. Ben Bradley is the leader of the county council and a local MP.
Colleagues in Parliament in particular have been messaging me in the last few days where their area has been on the shortlist and how disappointed they are to have missed out on it. So, we're delighted to have it here, and it has a huge impact on the local community too, with skills and jobs and opportunities for the future.
The government's commitment to Bassett Law here in Notts comes with a £200 million promise initially. Afterwards, up to £20 billion for the regional economy, plus 10,000 jobs. Bassett Law's MP, Brendan Clark-Smith, says this is levelling up in action.
This is on a different scale, and this is something that is going to be globally significant, and it really puts Bassett Law on the map. We're maybe world famous for Robin Hood in these parts, but I think now we're going to be world famous for nuclear fusion.
Fusion technology copies the reaction that powers the sun. Scientists have studied it for decades, and this leap forward could help humanity leave fossil fuels in the past.
High quality employment and growth in this region.
Ian is chief exec of the UK Atomic Energy Authority.
It's sustainable, it's continuous, you don't wait for the wind to blow and the sun to shine, so it has all this really attractive features, but it's really hard, and we haven't yet shown that we can do it. That's why this is so important, because it's going to show that we can do it.
These cooling towers have been on Nottinghamshire's skyline for 60 years. People have built their homes and their families around them. Soon they'll be demolished, yet the promise of nuclear fusion means that for many years to come, the mass production of energy will continue to play a role in the life of people who live here. Dave has lived in the village next to West Burton for 20 years. He says the community has welcomed the news.
We're so used to having it, and it's been good for the population here. Many of the residents actually work at EDF, and I'm sure many of them will continue with their children to work in the new projects.
The world is caught in an energy crisis. The climate is changing, while Putin restricts gas as a weapon of war. Fusion is still firmly in the future. This site won't open until 2040. But it puts Britain at the spark of a new industrial revolution. Will Hollis for GB News in Bassett Law.
Philip, what do you make of that? I mean, that's it's partly about energy security, which must be a good thing in when we're reading headlines in the papers.
I've got that. Electricity blackout
warnings and
winter power cuts.
Also levelling up. I
think this is absolutely key and to be welcomed. And it was good in the Prime Minister's speech that she mentioned levelling up, which she didn't mention when she was on the steps of Number 10. The point is she's talked about means. She didn't talk about ends, and the ends are that for the Conservative Party, with their majority, they have to level up. They have to deliver for people in those constituencies. And I think what's happening in Bassett Law is fantastic. It's British technology, it's fusion. If it works, it'll be transformative. And again, this is why I like the idea of the growth zones. I would like to see private sector growth zones, not just licensed through the local state. And then the argument is, if it's good for certain places, why not just apply it universally and have essentially the whole country operating under similar
will it work
parameters?
politically? I mean, this is sort of jam tomorrow. 2040, Will was saying in his piece there about when this would come. Will that be enough at the next election for people in places like Bassetlaw to know that this is happening, or do things have to have actually happened?
Well, I think, you know, even to make it happen needs jobs, investment, and people are hired. So I think it's what she has to do is give a vision. Leadership is giving a vision of how you get through difficulty. Leadership is not abandoning people to difficulty. Now, I think there's why I think the Prime Minister might yet fight through it, is if you look at her response to the energy bill crisis, you know, it was swift, it was all-encompassing, and it was at a grand scale. And she's got to learn to do that again, and she's got to do that while listening more to what people want and need. Let's talk about what the Conservatives haven't yet done. They haven't yet moved any legislation to tackle kind of woke agendas. They haven't done anything around protecting gender-critical feminists. They haven't done anything around kind of the ever greater expansion.
They understand what a woman is, though. You're all right. They've got that one.
No, and she's got a good record on that. And they haven't done anything about the kind of diversity agenda that penalises working-class people. So we've got to see movement on the culture wars with real kind of legislation that empowers ordinary people. But we've got to see economic enfranchisement of those left-behind areas, of the areas that moved to the Conservatives in Brexit. It can't be abandoned. And the trouble with the libertarian approach is it does ideologically mean abandonment. And that can't be the case. There's got to be a sophisticated account of government intervention that backs these places and gives people there a sense of the future.
The idealist has to meet the realist, and you're quite right, it has to be timed. It can't be jam tomorrow. It's got to be the present, the continuous, the future, the energy bills. What can you realistically expect, and what will you get, and will you need to do anything else? But you know what? We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with you. And after the break, we'll be going around the world in 80 seconds. That's right, all the top stories from around the world in 80 seconds, so don't go anywhere.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
And welcome back. We've actually got some views in, which I wanted to share with you. Patricia says Mrs Thatcher didn't win in the first place because of the Falklands War.
Exactly, yeah.
She won because Labour was incompetent, like when Brown lost. They can't help themselves. They always leave an empty purse and a large dole queue.
Well said, Patricia.
And thank you for that. Margie in Cheshire says the problem with Liz Truss has is the government backbenchers think they can run this country. They will put a brick wall in front of any idea that she has. The whole system is toxic. So thank you for those views. Keep them coming in.
Yeah. Let's now take a look at some of the biggest stories from around the globe.
We're going to start with the terrible news from Thailand, where an ex-policeman killed 37 people, including 23 children, at a childcare centre in a sickening attack yesterday.
According to authorities, the armed attacker broke into a building just after lunchtime on Thursday, shooting his way past a teacher and parent outside before forcing his way into a room where children were napping.
Flags across Thailand are flying at half-mast today as the country comes to grips with the unimaginable tragedy. Hong Kong has recently scrapped its quarantine requirement after around 2.5 years, and they are expected to give away 500,000 plane tickets in a bid to entice tourists.
The giveaway is expected to launch early next year after long and harsh COVID restrictions, with the special administrative region effectively closed for the past 30 months, with mandatory hotel quarantine for overseas travellers ending at the end of last month.
Joe Biden has warned the risk of nuclear Armageddon is at its highest since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, as Moscow talks openly of the possibility of using tactical nuclear weapons in its invasion of Ukraine.
And the US president said Putin was not joking when he talks about potential use of tactical nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons, adding that the Russian army is significantly underperforming. And billionaire businessman Elon Musk has said he aims to complete his purchase of Twitter by the end of the month. But the company will not take yes for an answer, with Twitter saying it did not trust the offer would come through. Well, joining us to discuss what the future of Twitter would look like under Elon Musk is the writer and broadcaster Emma Webb. Well, Emma, this has been a saga and a half. He was buying it secretly. He then went on the board. He was then undermining Twitter, saying, did it have a future? Questioning all the people who weren't there. And then finally he said he was going to buy it. Then he wasn't going to buy it. And now he seems to have been pushed into buying it. What a saga. But will he change the face of Twitter if he does become the owner?
You're right. There was a period of time as well where I think that the company itself thought that his offer to buy Twitter was some kind of sophisticated joke. And so now actually he's being threatened with court action, and they want to go ahead with that court action, even though Musk has asked for it to be delayed. Because he says that he is going ahead with the purchase. So I think that there are some very positive things that I think we could expect from Musk buying Twitter, but I think there are also some things that perhaps we should consider as not being worrying, but just to slightly mitigate our hopes. So Musk has been very forthright about wanting Twitter to become a free speech platform, and he wants it to be something that he sees as being the acceleration towards the creation of a new app that he calls X, which is actually the name of his first company, which merged with PayPal. It was a payment system, and X would become a kind of hybrid version of lots of different apps, quite similar to WeChat in China. And the hope for him is that this would actually make Twitter into a profitable company, because at the moment Twitter just simply isn't, and actually its users are not that high compared with WeChat, which has over 1 billion people using it every day. But I think that there are also concerns there with one person having so much significant control over or hoping to have so much considerable control over so many platforms that people would be reliant on in their everyday life. We've seen this recently with the consequences of PayPal closing down people's accounts. So on the one hand, there's always a risk when somebody has so much power over a platform or a monopoly over multiple platforms. But on the other hand, Elon Musk is a free speech champion, and he does want to see the platform be transformed into what Twitter was originally supposed to be, which is the free speech arm of the free speech party.
It seems to have got some people on the sort of metropolitan elite in America very exercised about this. Ben Collins of NBC said if the takeover gets done early, based on the people he's aligned with, yes, it would actually affect the US midterm elections, which I found quite strange because Twitter doesn't seem to have affected the elections much in the UK. If it had, I would have been out years ago, to be perfectly honest.
There's time. There's time yet.
Is it really possible that Elon Musk taking over Twitter could affect American elections in that way?
Well, I think what they're worried about is that the skew will no longer be in their favour, because actually censorship favours democratic manipulation. And this is a point that has been raised time and time again. You know, Twitter is involved in the censoring of all kinds of views that it thinks are unpalatable. We've seen the same thing with the government's online safety bill that is being proposed to limit content for adults that is regarded as, quote, legal but harmful. And so Twitter does censor political views. It censors gender critical feminists you were just talking about there. And that has the potential to skew democratic decisions. And actually, that's one of the reasons why Musk says he wants to buy Twitter in the first place, is because he thinks that it being the new public square, it's fundamental to democracy that people are able to express their views freely.
Emma Webb, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Thank you very much.
It was interesting. I saw a social media expert called Matt Navarra said, "I'll believe this when I see it," that Musk seems to have commitment issues. But he says he's going to do it, and he's always finding a way to say that he's not. So
haven't his previous girlfriends found that out as well?
I'm not going to get into that.
I just wonder, though, can you have an app where everybody is on? Is there something in it? We would say in Twitter in England's like 7-1 sort of socialist versus sort of conservatives. Could you have that open platform, or does it always naturally lend itself to a certain set of people? I'm just wondering if his aim or ambition could ever come off.
I don't know. I'm a fully paid up member of the Luddites, so it's way beyond my knowledge, all of this stuff, to be perfectly honest.
But coming up, who owns our roads?
Are drivers or cyclists more reckless when it comes to safety? We've got a lively discussion coming up. You don't want to miss it. That's after these headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Philip. It's 10:32, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The US president says the world is facing the biggest threat of nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago. Joe Biden says Russia's president wasn't joking when he threatened to use nuclear weapons after suffering setbacks in Ukraine. It follows a warning from Vladimir Putin that he'd use all means necessary to protect Russian soil, which he says now includes the 4 annexed Ukrainian regions. The government has opened a new licensing round for oil and gas exploration in the North Sea, the first since 2019. Nearly 900 locations are being offered, and as many as 100 licenses could be granted. It's in a bid to encourage production of new oil and gas supplies as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has ruled out launching an energy-saving public information campaign. That's despite warnings planned blackouts could hit the UK this winter if power plants are unable to source enough gas to keep running. It's understood the Business Secretary supports the £15 million campaign that could see households given advice like turning off radiators in empty rooms. And the average house price fell slightly last month by 0.1%. That's down from a record high in August. Figures from Halifax also show the annual rate of house price growth slowed to 9.9% in September. That's down from 11.4% in August. The average cost of a property in the UK is now just under £294,000. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2087 and €1.1430 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,528.80 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,003 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. Lots of you have been getting in touch. Esther?
Barry says, I do not accept the argument that people do not want low taxes. Of course people want low taxes, and they also want those taxes spent responsibly. It's also true that people want personal liberty. After all, that is why they voted for Brexit. Thanks, Barry.
Trev in Cornwall says the big problem Truss has is bitter Sunak supporters, disgruntled ex-ministers and some backbenchers that are in the wrong party. If there was party unity and the Tory party got behind her, we would not have this press and media hysterical maelstrom.
Wow, Gillian says it's quite obvious what people want. Migration vastly reduced, especially the small boat farce, with these chances being put in expensive accommodation. I don't know why politicians don't understand this. There are more than enough people in this small island to do the work that needs to be done. People need to get into work.
And Jeff in Buckingham says, I voted for Brexit to leave the EU and their controlling ways, not about migration. I wish they would stop assuming that's why we voted and trying to say this is what we voted for. And Gary says Brexit was about controlling immigration, not stopping it. Free movement allowed anyone from any of the 27 member states to come to the UK without control.
Keep your views coming in. You know where to, gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Now, as you know, we at GB News are the People's Channel.
That means we want to bring you discussions and debates that you, our viewers and listeners, care about.
Let us know what topics you want us to discuss and we'll get you the expert guests. So contact us, gbviews at gbnews.uk, and don't, as always, be shy.
I was going to say, you're not usually, so don't be shy on this either. But to kick us off, we're debating who owns our roads, cyclists or drivers. Are too many drivers reckless and dangerous towards cyclists on the roads, or are cyclists given an easy ride for jumping red lights and traffic violations that could cost motorists their licence or a pedestrian their life?
To debate this, we've got two amazing guests. Grant Davis is chairman of the London Cab Drivers Club, who joins us directly from his cab. And Casper Hughes is the spokesperson for Stop Killing Cyclists.
So, gents, thank you both for joining us. I can see that you're stationary there in your taxi. But Casper, let's start with you. What are drivers doing wrong?
Well, I think I would start from a slightly different angle. I'd start from the fact that this this question is calculated really to stir up antagonism, which leads to real world consequences. People do get killed on the roads, and particularly people cycling get killed far more so than they should be doing because of the antagonism that's stirred up by these binary debates. And the reality is, in this in the age in which we live, we know there's a climate and ecological crisis, and we should be focusing on using the roads to decarbonise society, which means prioritising transport that doesn't, it's less harmful to society.
Casper, this is great. Yeah. We have now, I don't even need to go and speak to anybody else. You're saying you are happy with drivers, you welcome, they are great on the road, and it is all harmonious, and you think all drivers are great and considerate to you.
No, I didn't say that. Definitely, I didn't say that. No, we know full well that drivers are the largest cause of every 20 minutes in the UK somebody gets maimed or killed by a driver on the road. So that's whether that's other drivers, pedestrians, people cycling, or whatever. So drivers are an enormous cause, but also there are wider issues here. Transport is the largest emitting sector for emissions in the UK, and often is the case in cities as well. So the reality is here, it's not about who owns the roads, it's how we use those roads, and we should be using those roads to decarbonise the largest emitting sector.
So Grant, what do you think about the fact that drivers are pretty poor, and what do you think about cyclists on the road? Are they a menace as far as you're concerned, or are you happy to see them on the roads in London?
Yeah, listen, I'm happy to see them on the roads in London. I've got a bike myself. I've got 2 teenage sons, and sometimes we go out for a cycle. Safety is paramount, not only for the cyclist, but also, believe it or not, for the pedestrian. Because I drive my cab in London, and trust me when I say, not a day goes by when we come to a red light and the cyclists assume that's nothing to do with them. You ask anyone in London, you're at a red light, the cyclists just go through as if there's, they need a colour check, really. What's green and what's red? Because red means nothing to them. And the trouble in London as well was, like major cities everywhere, we've seen a massive boom in fast food deliveries, and you've got guys on these bikes. You just showed a picture there. There's a load of companies, I won't name them, but these guys are up against it. They've got to deliver some fella a pizza in 5 minutes, and to do that and to be on time, they don't have to obey the laws of the land, of the highway code. They go through the lights, and for me as a professional driver, we've got cycle lanes that hopefully keeps us apart, which is great, yeah, it keeps the cyclists safe. But if the cyclists want to use the road and have all that protection and the facility of the roads, then unfortunately, I think we're at a time where they've got to get insurance, they've got to wear like a high-vis bib, so they become accountable for their actions. So if they go through red lights. If it was me, I'd get points and probably lose my licence. Where cyclists, they come to the red light, look left and right and think, I'm going. And that's what happens. So cyclists need to be made aware of the impact that they're having on all the other road users, really.
Let's put that to Casper. Casper, it's a common criticism that you get of that Grant's just made there about cyclists going through red lights. I've seen it when I've been stood at a red light and the cyclists just go
Well, I've got figures here as well. 27% ignored red lights occasionally and 8% often. So this does happen, the ignoring of red lights.
So what about that? What about Grant's point that the rules of the road, that you should have to face points and have, just like drivers do if you don't abide by the rules of the road?
Yeah, I mean, 80% of drivers' speed, 86% of drivers' speed, 99.7% of everybody killed on the pavements are killed by drivers. Everyone killed going through red lights, bar one person since 2000, this century has been killed by drivers going through red lights. This idea that people cycling skipping red lights more than people driving is nonsense. The danger that is being caused to people on the roads is coming from drivers, and not only is that a danger directly to people, there are 40,000 people dying from pollution. There are inactivity diseases that are being born from people having to take 2 tons of metal to go and every time they need to go down to the shop to buy a pint of milk. We've got to move away from this means of transport.
Casper, pointing to somebody else who might have skipped a red light. It was looking at cyclists sort of skipping lights.
So why are we looking at cyclists when nearly everybody killed
Casper,
going through red lights?
Do you agree that maybe there should be number plates, there should be insurance, there should be road tax paid by cyclists as well? So there is a fairness on the roads for all of the users, and you've had new lanes built for you. So should you have number plates, insurance and road tax?
There is no fairness on the road for anybody. There's no fairness on the road.
To pay your way on the roads, Casper.
So that's just a gross misunderstanding of how the roads are actually paid for. The roads are paid for out of general taxation. So it's what drivers are paying for is VED, and that is basically that depends on how emitting their vehicles are from the exhaust pipe.
Grant, I'll bring you in because that obviously sounds like a no, that Casper doesn't want number plates, insurance, road tax, everybody who shares the road abiding by the law. What do you think, Grant?
Well, why would he want regulation? Like I said, it's a free-for-all. And 2 points I'd like to bring up with Casper is, unfortunately, in London, depending on what side you think, the TfL have spent nearly £800 million causing absolute chaos, building cycle lanes, cutting through London, massive traffic congestion, emissions, and Transport for London have spent, like I said, nearly £800 million on a very, very small percentage of London's population who wish to travel for predominantly rush hour on their bike. It's unbelievable the amount of money that TfL have put aside just for cyclists. And another point I'd just like to say to Casper, the black cab trade, he talks about fuels and emissions. The black cab trade has spent £400 million thus far on electric cabs. And unfortunately, Transport for London and the Mayor has spent nothing on infrastructure. Yeah, there's 6,500 electric cabs and just 30 charge points in London, central London for it. It's absolutely disgraceful. And that's the sort of thing that should be brought up. So when Casper's riding next to me on his bike, yeah, he's not breathing in dirty fumes, so we can increase the fleet of electric cabs and get where we all want to be.
Casper, what about that, about all these cycle lanes that sometimes you see with hardly any cyclists on and the traffic all stacked up with all the emissions that come from that? That can't be good for the environment, surely.
So we've seen air quality has been improved in London by the implementation of, well, initially the congested charge zone, but then more recently ULEZ as well. Unfortunately, whilst the new cabs have got zero emissions from their exhaust pipe, that doesn't deal with all of the emissions. Unfortunately, there's tyre emissions, there's road wear, there's other emissions as well that come from these vehicles that are extremely damaging on children. And it's wonderful that the TfL have been spending money on protected cycling lanes. For example, 70% of traffic over Blackfriars Bridge during 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock is cycle traffic. That has begun to massively reduce congestion in one of the busiest areas of town. But I go back to the point again. The problem that we've got here is that transport is the largest emitting sector. We are in the throes of a massive climate and ecological crisis. And we basically need to work out how very quickly we can get cars off the road and more safe and climate responsible means of transport to the fore.
Casper, Grant, thank you very much. I'm not entirely sure there was a meeting of minds there, but thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we will see what our viewers have to make of that debate. But thank you for your time there. Anyway, I'd be interested to know what people think of that. Interesting. Now, splitting bills on a date is always an awkward topic, isn't it?
Yeah.
However, could splitting bills be taking on a whole new meaning?
Muslim dating app Muzz recently featured a tube advert with the slogan, "Find a Habibi to split the energy bills with." This attracted some criticism about whether people's economic hardships should be trivialised. So here we are, joined
by Nadia Essex, who's our relationship guru. Nadia, do you think that it's a good idea to try and find somebody in a relationship simply to share the bills with? It seems to me that it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's on first blush you go, oh yeah, splitting the bills, that sounds like a great idea. But then actually you think, do you really want to live with someone that you end up not really liking or not knowing very much just to save a bit on the electricity bill? I personally would rather be alone and pay full price than be stuck with someone I'm not into just so they can pay half so I can have a hot shower of an evening.
Yorkshire, Nadia.
But really, going back, I guess, to when time began, didn't people always partner up in a way to share, I know it's share life and obviously share the dangers of life and the fun of life, but it was also to share bills as well. I think this is common sense.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think it naturally is bringing us back. I'm an old school type of gal. I like old school dating. I'm very old fashioned. I like meeting in real life and actually coming together and supporting each other. Yeah. And I think, it encourages the younger generation to think about joining forces as a team rather than two independent women women doing their own thing. But I feel like if you go into it looking for a tenancy agreement, or if you're into it because you need a roof over your head, then you're kind of starting off on the wrong foot. Where's the love?
You're not looking for love, are you then? You're not looking for love. You're looking for free rent or whatever it is. But, again, I'm going to be quite honest here. Don't lots of people, close to the birthday, close to Christmas time, you could have ended your relationship, but you don't, because there's a Christmas present or birthday present in there. I'm not being mercenary here. I'm just saying.
Very mercenary here.
This is true. I mean, we've got to be honest. And people in the past have said, let's not talk about money. Could relationships lasted longer, actually, if they had have been a little bit more honest about their finances, what they were looking for, where they were hoping to go? I think this is great, talking about finances.
Yeah, and I think it's important that, finances in a relationship should come together. I always think there should be a joint account as well as your separate accounts. I think that's something really important because you need
hitting on a hot topic, that separate accounts or the one account.
Yeah, you need both. You definitely need both. You need to have a separate account so you've got your independence and you keep your independence, but you should have a joint account because you're going to pay the bills and it should be fair. And therefore, how much easier is it to have a joint account? You put all your lecky bill, you put your council tax and all your bills in the joint, and then you don't have to worry about it. And that's one thing then you don't really have to argue about, because one of the biggest arguments that breaks up relationships is money. And if you're constantly going, well, I paid £2.50 extra last month because you bought more food from the supermarket, but no, you put the heating on for 5 minutes longer and turned the thermostat, it's arguing. Whereas if you just have one joint account with your separate accounts, but the main account for your bills, then that's always a good thing. But I think splitting is important, but I don't know if advertising going into a relationship as that as your number one priority is the right way to go. You should go into it to look for love, and then everything else hopefully falls into place.
To be fair, Nadia, I think me and Esther do have those arguments about who's had the heated on too much and who bought the last cock. So it doesn't bode well.
This is because I like the heating on come winter time, and Philip just doesn't feel the cold at all and would have the windows open up all the time.
What I want to know is when it comes to splitting bills in a relationship, should it always be 50-50, or should it be done pro rata based on each other's earnings? Which is the way for a happy relationship?
Well, it's got to be 50-50, really, because ultimately it does all come out in the wash. Someone will use more heating, but then usually the men will have dirtier clothes, and so will use then the washing and the laundry and the tumble dryer more. So it does all come out in the wash, pun intended. I think 50-50 is fair, and if you just do it 50-50 and then kind of forget about it,
But
if you start nitpicking,
I know where you're going.
If somebody,
partner, you're in trouble.
If one person earns twice as much as the other person, isn't the person who earns less going to be a bit aggrieved with a 50-50 split?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's earning double the amount of money, then yes, of course, they should contribute more, because that is the fairest thing to do. You don't want to leave... Ultimately, you want to make sure that at the end of the month you have money as a couple to do fun couple things. And if the person on the low income has got nothing left because they're paying all their money towards half bills, you're not going to have a very good relationship. So it really, again, we go back to what I think Esther was saying about common sense. It's just a bit of common sense. Do what feels right, but try not to argue about it, because it spirals into resentment, and then before you know it, you're arguing over a pair of socks when actually it's not the socks.
Yeah, I like this. You know what sort of relationship you're going into. It said on the tin, this is a relationship where we're looking to halve our bills. Join up now. You kind of know what you're getting. You know you weren't going in for being wined and dined and romanced. You're going in to split your bills.
Yeah. Are you? Do you think?
I've learnt a lot about you today.
50,
all the questions you were asking.
Well, I know you're not going to be breaking up at before the end of October with me until your birthday's gone. What are you for splitting 50-50?
Yeah, 50-50. Nadia, we've loved having you on. We'll totally have you back when we might need marriage counselling ourselves.
We know who to go to, though.
Yeah.
No, we know.
Now, in the past few years, single people have had to deal with all the restrictions. We've got a totally different thing that's happening now. OK. Go on.
This weekend's blockbuster boxing clash between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn has been postponed after Benn tested positive for a banned substance.
The fight, which was meant to carry on the rivalry of their fathers in the 1990s, was called off by the British Boxing Board of Control.
To talk more about this in more detail, we'll be joined by Umar Ahmed from IFL TV, a boxing YouTube channel. Umar, how badly is boxing's reputation going to suffer as a result of this saga?
Well, obviously, it doesn't paint it in a great light at the moment. There have been previous drug issues in boxing, of course, before. I think it's what comes out of this now and the steps moving forward that can sort of recover the image for boxing. But obviously, this past week hasn't been great.
And so, how widespread do we think that drug taking might be in boxing? Is this just the tip of a potential iceberg?
Well, it's a sketchy area because the failed test was under VADA, which is an independent drugs testing agency, which only has to report back to the people involved in the contract, i.e. the fighters, the managers, promoters, trainers. It doesn't have to report back to the commissions and the public. That's not its duty. It only has to report back to the people involved in the fight. So there could have been scenarios before where someone's failed a VADA test and the fight carried on. This test apparently came out 2 weeks ago, and we only found out through the mail a couple of days ago on Wednesday that there was a positive test. So there could have been fights before that have taken place in this country where we haven't known and someone's failed a test.
And so, just as to set the scene, how big a fight was this going to be in the boxing world?
This was huge, obviously, because of the fathers, Christopher Eubank Sr. and Nigel Benn, who had two epic fights, and probably the greatest British rivalry that sport's seen. And their sons were about to get in the ring, and it was sort of billed as Chapter 3, the third fight. Yeah. And it was a rivalry that captured the whole country, and it wasn't as big as the fathers when they fought, but it was near enough there. And I had sort of non-boxing mates asking me about this fight, and that's when you know it's a big fight.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. Coming up, we've got another hour of action for you, so don't go anywhere.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning and welcome back to Friday Morning with me, Esther and Phil.
We'll be joined this hour by a member of the pop group Steps and father to twins H to discuss the trials and tribulations of parenting in 2022.
We'll also be discussing prison sentencing and looking at updates from Iran, where protests continue after 3 weeks.
All of that plus much more after your latest headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Philip. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The US president says the world is facing the biggest threat of nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago. Joe Biden says Russia's president wasn't joking when he threatened to use nuclear weapons after suffering setbacks in Ukraine. It follows a warning from Vladimir Putin that he'd use all means necessary to protect Russian soil, which he says now includes the 4 annexed Ukrainian regions. The government has opened a new licensing round for oil and gas exploration in the North Sea, the first since 2019. As many as 100 licences could be granted in a bid to encourage production of new oil and gas supplies as quickly as possible. Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg says it'll boost the UK's economy, energy security and support skilled jobs. Climate Minister Graham Stewart told GB News it is good for the environment.
It's also good for the environment because oil and gas produced in the UK has much lower emissions around its production than does the stuff that we import from abroad. So replacing imports with UK-produced oil and gas while nonetheless maintaining our legally obliged trajectory to net zero in 2050 is a win all round for the country, and I'm delighted to see this announcement today.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has ruled out launching an energy-saving public information campaign. That's despite warnings planned blackouts could hit the UK this winter if power plants are unable to source enough gas to keep running. It's understood Jacob Rees-Mogg supports the £15 million campaign, which would see households given advice like turning off radiators in empty rooms. The Times reports the idea has been blocked by Number 10. The Nobel Peace Prize for 2022 has gone to 3 human rights campaigners of Belarus, Russia and Ukraine. This year's award's being given to jailed Belarusian human rights activist Alice Bialyatsky, the Russian Memorial Organization and Ukrainian Center for Civil Liberties. The committee chair says the award recognises 3 outstanding champions of human rights in neighbouring countries. Thailand is mourning the death of at least 34 people, including 23 children, some as young as 2, following yesterday's massacre at a nursery. Government buildings are flying flags at half-mast and the first funerals being held for some of the victims. Police say the attacker, Panya Kamrab, had been discharged from the force last year and just hours earlier had appeared in court on drugs charges. He also killed his wife and child before taking his own life. The motive for the attack is not yet known. The French president says he hopes relations between the UK and the EU have entered a new phase after Brexit. Emmanuel Macron was responding to comments by Prime Minister Liz Truss describing him as a friend. The two leaders have met for talks in Prague at the inaugural summit of the European Political Community. In a joint statement, they announced a renewed bilateral agenda and agreed to hold a UK-France summit next year. Meanwhile, the UK and Ireland have said they'll work to try and resolve the stalemate over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly met his Irish counterpart Simon Coveney last night, with the pair discussing their mutual desire for action. The first bilateral meeting between the UK and Ireland since Liz Truss became Prime Minister will be followed by the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference later. A 14-year-old boy has been charged with murder following the fatal stabbing of another teenager in Gateshead. Tomasz Olekshak, also 14, was found with serious injuries near the Springwell estate on Monday evening. He died in hospital in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Northumbria Police says the teenager, who can't be named for legal reasons, is appearing at Newcastle Magistrates Court this morning. The force says the 13-year-old girl who was arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender has been bailed. And the average house price fell slightly last month by 0.1%. That's down from a record high in August. Figures from Halifax also show the annual rate of house price growth slowed to 9.9% in September. That's down from 11.4% in August. The average cost of a property in the UK is now just under £294,000. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Esther and Philip.
Good morning and welcome back to Friday Morning with me, Esther and Phil. We've got a fantastic hour of TV lined up for you.
We'll be joined by a member of the Justice Select Committee, Kieran Mullen, to discuss the indeterminate sentences for public protection after they called for a comprehensive resentencing programme.
We will also be joined by actor, singer and father of twins Ian H. from Steps Watkins after research found that new parents are under more pressure than ever to be perfect, with social media being the main culprit.
And we'll be looking at updates from Iran as widespread protests continue following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in police custody.
And keep those views coming in to us at GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews. And the views are coming in thick and fast,
particularly about cyclists and taxi drivers. I've got to say that on the straw poll we've had loads of views, but they all seem to be pretty much on the side of the cab driver. I think it's fair to say. Anne says, hello, Esther and Phil. Single cyclists are fine, brackets usually. It is the larger club groups that are simply a pain in the backside. There should be mandatory insurance and competency for anyone using the roads.
And hi, Esther and Phil. Me and my wife can't stop watching GB News. Keep up the good work. My issue is cycling on non-designated pavements in towns. Cyclists are weaving in and out, missing older people and young children on pavements. These people need a fine. That was Baz.
And David says, who owns our roads, you ask? Well, I think the people that pays for them, and that's the motorists. The cyclists contribute nothing towards the upkeep of our roads, so should have no say whatsoever in what happens to them.
Now, I'm going to do this one. This wasn't about cycling, but it's from Toby, and he says, Dear GB News, on a cheery note, I phoned my doctors on Tuesday at 2:30 and got an appointment at 3:40 the same day. Just don't want the idea that every surgery across the country is the same. Thanks for that cheery note.
Yeah, and Andy says, to level the playing field of road users, let's make cyclists pay a road tax like other users. Consideration and courtesy are at the hands of individuals and not related to whether you ride a cycle or drive a vehicle. After all, many people do both.
Hi, Phil, Esther, this is from Steve. I'm a driving instructor and fully agree with your cab driver. I see the bad cyclists everywhere all day, and it's about time they were made to adhere to the rules like everybody else. They are a danger to themselves.
And there's plenty more along the
where they came from.
A similar ilk to that, so keep those views coming in.
Now, the House of Commons Justice Select Committee has called on the government to resentence all prisoners subject to IPP sentences after it found them irredeemably flawed. So, we're going to talk about IPPs, and most people don't know what that is, the difference between what would be a fixed sentence and one which is an indeterminate sentence, and how they came about and why some people feel they need to go immediately. Phil?
So just to explain, back in 2003, the Labour government passed the Criminal Justice Act and brought into effect indeterminate sentences for public protection. And this applied to people who committed specific offences, which were mainly violent offences and sexual offences. And anybody who committed those offences and had committed one and been convicted of one previously were automatically deemed to be dangerous. The courts had to give them an indeterminate sentence for public protection. And that came with three things. They served a tariff, a minimum tariff that was set by the judge, but crucially, they wouldn't be released from prison even after they'd served the tariff unless they could prove they were no longer a danger to society. And then if they were released, they would be on a life licence. And so that was basically indeterminate sentences for public protection. They were abolished by the coalition government in 2012 when Ken Clarke was the Justice Secretary, but obviously some people are still in prison on a legacy from those original rules.
And people think the unfairness, isn't it, is that your sentence could keep getting extended because you have to prove that you're not going to be of any danger coming out.
And just to give you some figures, in total 8,711 people received an IPP sentence. As of June 2022, there were 2,926 still in prison, of which 1,492 have never been released and 1,434 have been recalled to custody. And 608 of those prisoners are at least 10 years over their original tariff. Yeah. So to discuss this is a member of the Justice Select Committee, Kieran Muller. Now, Kieran, the Justice Select Committee said that these IPPs that are still in the system should be abolished and that the people should be resentenced to give them a determinate sentence. You voted against that report. Why did you vote against?
Well, I think the first thing to say is you've done a good job of talking about the unfairness that's definitely there in the system. As you mentioned, there are some people that are 10 years over the original tariff. Some of them were only given an original sentence of a couple of years. So you can imagine if you're in prison, you were told your minimum sentence was a couple of years. You've seen other people come into prison for a similar offence, leave many years, you're still there. But that's a really difficult thing to go through. And not just that, sometimes the parole board who decides whether these prisoners can be released might say, you can potentially be released, but we think you need to do XYZ programme in prison. Some of these prisoners can't access those programmes. So you can imagine there's a real injustice there. But ultimately, I felt that the thing we had to keep in mind is that in all the evidence we heard, and we heard a lot of evidence that these prisoners being on the sentence, having this unending sentence that they felt wasn't fair, was making it very difficult for them to rehabilitate. In amongst those people, there were some prisoners that the experts that we spoke to that worked with them felt really were still dangerous. And actually, they would have not wanted them to be released from prison. And ultimately, if you go through a resentencing exercise, the sentences we've got available to us now would have meant some of them could have potentially been released at some point. And I just personally felt, as much as I had a lot of sympathy for some of the prisoners in this situation, that I just felt we couldn't justify letting out what are some potentially very dangerous people. And that's what meant in the end I didn't agree, even if I agreed with a lot of the issues that the Justice Select Committee, my colleagues, raised in this regard.
Kieran, you're a doctor, but actually you come from a family of police officers. So do you think you were bringing your knowledge here from your sort of family background on what you thought, was a danger to have back on the street?
Well, I guess I spent a few years actually volunteering as a police officer myself. And I think that the one lesson I took from all that is very, very sadly, there are just people out there who, with the best efforts in the world, just don't leave a life of crime. And actually, we know even with good rehabilitation, it's quite difficult to get people, if they're in a pattern of offending, for whatever those reasons might be, it's quite hard to get them out of it. Most people actually just grow out of it. They get fed up with that lifestyle. External action doesn't seem to have a huge effect, no matter how good it is. And I used to deal with people who were just arrested again and again and again, and they were given community orders and rehab orders, and it didn't make a difference. And so generally speaking, I'm wary of repeat offenders and the fact that we let repeat offenders out again and again and again, and they go on to commit more and more crime. And so these people in particular, these are people that some of them we know are very dangerous. The idea that we might let them out is difficult for me. Other people will point out quite fairly that that's how our system works. Outside of this small group of people, we let people out of prison all the time who we think may well go on to offend. They've served their sentence. Even if they haven't changed their ways in prison, we still let them out. And so that's again why I understand why people feel this group has been hard done by. But ultimately, that for me wasn't enough to let me say that we should let out some people that are going to be very serious potential reoffenders.
Now, Donna Mooney, Kieran, who is from a group called Ungrip, her brother took his own life in 2015 following a second refusal from the parole board to be released. I know she gave evidence to the Select Committee. He'd served 6 years of an IPP with a 4-year tariff, and she said that one of the reasons why he took his own life was that he referred to the sentence as a mental torture, a sentence that keeps you in prison with no idea if you'll ever be released. And Ken Clarke, when he abolished these IPPs, said that basically, how do you ever prove that you're no longer a danger to society? It's virtually impossible to do. Do you not have sympathy for what Ken Clarke and Donna say there?
Yeah, I definitely do. But I mean, the one thing I would say is that the vast majority of these prisoners have been released. So that was another reason why I felt on balance that there wasn't the justification, because actually you can be released on these sentences. Thousands of people have been released. As you said, of the almost 9,000 that were originally given one of these sentences, only 1,500 roughly have never been released. So the vast majority have been released. It is possible to prove that you're safe within the prison environment and what's available. But what I would agree is it's a very difficult thing to go through. And I definitely agree that we need to do more to help those prisoners make sure that they get all the support they need to show that they're potentially safe to be released. No disagreement with that. And definitely we heard very powerfully what it must be like to be under one of those sentences. Politics, being an MP is often about weighing two different injustices. On the one hand, we've got the injustice of people who are going through a bit of a torture, which is being in prison, not knowing when you might get out. On the other hand, there's the risk that we let some people out that we know are still dangerous, and they might go on to commit very serious further offences. That wouldn't be fair on those victims and their friends and family either. So, politicians, reasonable people can disagree on this issue, I think.
Kieran, we're going to bring in Philip Blond, who's in the studio with us as well. And, adding on to what Kieran said, though, we're seeing an escalation in violence. We're seeing now brutality on the streets. We're seeing young people being murdered on the streets. And this idea that people have gone into prison and been rehabilitated, understanding what they've done, it doesn't seem to be the case when we're being confronted all this time with yet more sort of violence.
I think Kieran speaks incredibly well about the problem. There's been quite a lot of work done in America. In America, there's an explosion of crime and gun crime. And one of the most consequent causal factors is release from prison. And what we don't have in this country, and which I think we still need, is an ability to keep the public safe and keep dangerous people that, on the balance of judgment, we think are likely to reoffend in prison. And we don't. I'd like to ask Kieran, what do we have on the statute book for judges that allows them to do that? And if we don't have anything, that is a severe lack, because we know we have people who are going out harming other human beings time and time again.
Well, I think the thing to point out, I do agree that there are some things we could do to reduce that risk that we don't do. Very often prisoners get released with nowhere to live. If you're someone that's maybe struggled with addiction, not got a very family, you've ended up in a life of crime, you spend a year in prison, you can't get a job, you're dumped out on the streets. All these factors are going to make someone more likely to commit crime. Now, I always argue and will always argue that's not an excuse, and we should accept that as an explanation, because other people will go through those same difficult things and don't end up thinking it's okay to be criminals, and however they might do that. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do what we can. There's low-hanging fruit out there when it comes to making it less likely that someone's going to go back to reoffending. And prisons, I'm afraid, are still not doing everything they can when it comes to supporting people with skills that might get them a job, to deal with maybe their mental health issues, reading and writing, all these things that we've discovered with people in prison. We're not helping them with those issues. Doesn't mean there shouldn't be an excuse.
Yeah, I think that's completely right, but that's often for lower level crime. I think what was right about the indeterminate sentences was the focus on violent and sexual offence. And as you quite rightly said in your earlier comments, people who sexually offend often can't get out of it, and they remain a permanent danger. So I think that if we can narrow the focus, not around people who commit low-level crime, because some of those indeterminate sentences were for people setting fire to, their mattresses or something like that. If we can narrow that focus, I still think there's an urgent need for something similar around violent and sexual offences.
And Philip, you read, I don't know if you want to admit this, but you read, what's it called? I
read a magazine called Inside Time. I don't know if you read it, Kieran, but it's a great magazine. It's a magazine written by prisoners for prisoners. And I read a letter, actually, from an IPP prisoner called Simon Rockfellows, and he wrote, time to bring back IPPs for knife crime. As an IPP myself, it has taught me a valuable lesson on what I did, the impact on my victims, and what sort of person I really was. The courses have taught me about my trust issues and how to control myself. And he was saying that, in order to tackle the problem, the scourge of knife crime, he said that if you're caught with a knife the first time, you should get a warning and go on a course. If you get caught a second time, you should be sent to prison. And on a third time, you should get an IPP, and that should be there until you can prove that you're no longer a danger. He actually said the government's slogan should be, carry a knife and you could lose your life, carry a knife, use a knife and you will get life. I think that lots of people in the country out there will think, well, surely it's common sense that you don't let somebody out of prison unless they're no longer a danger to society. Why would you let people out who are still a danger to society? It seems mad, doesn't it?
Yeah. But otherwise you'd have said they've served their time, you've done your time, and therefore you would be let out. But look, thank you for joining us, Kieran, because this is a really important conversation. I think it's getting more traction because of what I've said, more violence on the streets. What are we doing? How do we know they're safe to let out on the street? So thank you. And again, our viewers, I'm sure you've got an opinion and a view on that. But coming up, after the break, we'll be joined by H from Steps to talk about parenthood in 2022. So don't go anywhere.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 25 past 11. Now, according to new research, new parents are under more pressure than ever to be perfect, with social media being given as the main culprit.
According to the research, 65% said social media presented a glamorised version of parenting versus the warts and all view of being a real-life parent. And over two-thirds of parents said they feel an overwhelming pressure to be perfect.
Well, join us now to discuss the findings further is a singer, actor and father to twins, Ian H. from Steps Watkins. H, brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us. So, come on, are you a perfect parent?
Yes, of course he is.
Oh, is there anything... My goodness, if you look at my Instagram, I will keep it real. I mean, I turn my back and my children smear the windows with paint. In lockdown, I took my eye off the ball and my children sellotaped the cat. So it is far from perfect in my house, believe me.
That was if you took to me. But just before we discuss it further, just tell us about your road to parenthood, because it was quite a long road, wasn't it, for you?
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be a father. I always had that, paternal urge to have a family. So my children were born via surrogacy, and they're 6 years old now. I have twin boys, and it's been a little bit of an adventure. Let's just put it that way. No day is the same. It's carnage in my house, and I've recently become an ambassador for Play-Doh, and we celebrate messy parenting. So they've released this incredible book, which you can digitally download for free. You get top tips, stories, little golden nuggets from exhausted parents like myself, Vogue Williams, there's Mother Tucker. So incredible stories to maybe just celebrate those little wins. Wins such as drinking a hot cup of coffee.
It's no good complaining
sending your
about
children
them
to school with matching socks.
It's no good complaining about them smearing the windows with stuff if you're advocating messy parenting.
Well, no, I thought you were advocating messy parenting because you'd given up. Do you know what I mean? It was an admittable. No. But when you found out it was twins, did that worry you somewhat?
I'm just reading the caption below you. It's a tragedy when the stress goes on and you can't go.
See what we did there, H? See what we did there?
Most of my days are filled with tragedy, I'm not going to lie, because my life is messy and children are messy. There is no perfect parenting technique. And I do find there are so many pressures put on parents through social media, other parents, and this one really gets my goat. People who don't have children, they give you advice on parenting. No, everybody is different.
And you are a single parent now, and then you're going on tour with Steps now. How are you juggling everything?
Do you know what? I spin many plates. I juggle many balls. We've just finished our 20. Can you believe we've been going for 25 years, Steps, and we've just finished our summer tour now, and that was a challenge. So luckily, my parents live nearby, so I have an incredible support network. So they've been doing the school runs for me. But it's the first time my children actually came to a Steps concert and got what I do. So they stood at the side of the stage with their little ear defenders, and just to see the penny drop for them to realize what Daddy does, and then look at the audience and go, "Oh, they've come to see Daddy." Do you know what? That was priceless. That was magical.
Your question now: are you hoping that they will follow in Steps H?
Very, very good. Do you know, my children, they try so many different things. It's a hard business to be in, but, as long as they're enjoying what they do, at the moment, they're quite happy to climb trees and make swords out of sticks. So whatever works.
Well, H, good luck with the continued parenting, and good luck with I know you've got your Platinum Collection album out as well and all the rest of it, so I hope all of that goes well, and thank you for your update for everyone on messy parenting.
Yeah. If you can't keep them neat and tidy, become a messy parent. That's the message. Embrace messy parenthood.
Yes, I'm looking for babysitters, so I'll hook you up. Thank you.
We'll be there.
We'll put a shout out to the viewers to see if anybody's available.
Coming up, we'll be looking at updates from Iran, where the protests are entering the end of their third week. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Rhiannon. Thank you, Esther. It's coming up to 11:31. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The US president says the world is facing the biggest threat of nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago. Joe Biden says Russia's president wasn't joking when he threatened to use nuclear weapons after suffering setbacks in Ukraine. It follows a warning from Vladimir Putin that he'd use all means necessary to protect Russian soil, which he says now includes the 4 annexed Ukrainian regions. The government has opened a new licensing round for oil and gas exploration in the North Sea, the first since 2019. As many as 100 licences could be granted in a bid to encourage production of new oil and gas supplies as quickly as possible. Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg says it'll boost the UK's economy, energy security and support skilled jobs. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has ruled out launching an energy-saving public information campaign. That's despite warnings planned blackouts could hit the UK this winter if power plants are unable to source enough gas to keep running. It's understood the Business Secretary supports the £15 million campaign that could see households given advice like turning off radiators in empty rooms. And the UK's housing market is showing signs of slowing, with the average house price falling slightly last month by 0.1%. That's down from a record high in August. Figures from mortgage lender Halifax also show prices rose at an annual rate of 9.9% in September, the slowest rate since January. The average cost of a property in the UK is now just under £294,000. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Esther and Philip are back in just a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back now. Prime Minister Liz Truss was in Prague yesterday for the first meeting of the European Political Community, a new group dedicated to advancing security and energy cooperation across the continent.
The idea of the EPC is to bring together the EU's 27 members and countries that either border the EU or are in diplomatic alignment with it, where members can discuss issues of common interest.
It's fair to say that the EPC has raised some eyebrows, but Truss has said her attendance at the European Summit in Prague was not about moving closer to Europe.
To discuss this further, we're now joined by the chairman of the European Research Group, Mark Francois MP. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. The European political community, should Brexiteers be worried about this potential creep back towards EU membership by the back door?
I don't think so, Phil. I mean, it's basically a talking shop. And there were some useful discussions yesterday in the margins of it about things like support for Ukraine and energy security going through the winter. So, something beneficial came out of it. But we have to understand what Macron's long-term agenda is, which is completely different from ours and from the Prime Minister's. There was this, if you remember, this famous thing, is he friend or foe? Well, I've got another F for him. He's a federalist. He's always believed, and he's been consistent about it, in a federal Europe. So he called not long ago for a new intergovernmental conference, which is what the EU does when it wants to revise or bring in new treaties. And he and some people in Berlin want to create a new European treaty in which all national vetoes would be abolished, so that all the key decisions would be taken by qualified majority voting. And in that EU, which would be very close to a federal state, France and Germany would dominate the organisation. So that's what Macron wants. That is not what we want. And people like you and Esther and I didn't fight that struggle for all those years to uphold the result of the referendum to leave the European Union, only to rejoin it by some other means. So it might be what he wants, but it's absolutely not what we want.
It might be, I'm sure you're right, that Liz Truss wouldn't allow this to get us back into the EU by the back door. But do you worry that a future government may use this mechanism to do just that. So it can say we're not rejoining the EU, but just on an incremental basis get closer and closer again to the EU through something which is called the European political community.
Well, I think those who want us to rejoin the EU would try and do it by grandmother's footsteps. I don't think they try and do it all in one go, Phil, because they know that they lost the referendum. So there is a risk that a future Labour government would try and take us back in. I've always believed that Keir Starmer remains a Remainer. You and I and Esther will remember very well all those debates in the House of Commons, night after night, month after month, where Starmer, as the Labour Party's spokesman on all this, basically connived with the arch Europhiles in Parliament to do everything they could to stop us leaving the European Union, despite the democratic decision of the British people. You know, we saw that night after night. We saw what the guy really believed. So
Mark,
people should be under no illusion Starmer would take us back in given half a chance.
Mark, do you think this could be helpful in any way, this new grouping, maybe with the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Well, at the moment, it's a discussion group. And as I say, you could argue that there were some positive things that came out of it yesterday. But I believe Macron wants to use this to try and create a federal Europe. And as long as we're alert to that risk, I don't think we're going to fall for it. But I also think, quite sincerely, that the British people need to remain very alert to a Labour government that I believe, and many others believe, would try and take us back into the EU given half a chance. The negotiations on the protocol are ongoing. Steve Baker is leading for us on those. He's a former chairman of the ERG. Steve understands very well what all of the issues are. So I think, providing we remain clear-eyed about this, and we know what Macron's up to, we have not too much to fear. What I do think we have to worry about is what a Labour government would do. And as I say, we saw where Starmer's heart lies in all those debates in Parliament. Keir Starmer remains a Remainer.
Mark, Francois, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I should say that I'm sure Keir Starmer would refute the idea that he wants to take us back in any shape or form back into the EU, because he's made that perfectly clear. But Mark, Francois, we thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.
Now at GB News, we have an exclusive poll for you today. Let's go through the results. So Labour have a 32-point lead over the Conservative Party. 52% of people would vote for them if there was a general election tomorrow.
What do you make of that, Philip?
Well, it compounds what we said earlier. If these results carry through to a general election, it will be worse than 1997. You know, it will be a complete evisceration of the Conservative Party. We lose the blue wall, we lose the red wall, we lose any wall. And the question is how baked in is this? And I'm afraid it's pretty baked in, because the coalition that Brexit brought together for the Conservative Party has been fraying, because nobody's delivered on it for those voters. Boris Johnson, I think, had the best political intuitions on what the voters needed, but he didn't deliver on it. Didn't deliver on.
Is this recoverable for the Conservative Party? Can they win the next election?
Not if they stay on their present course. I mean, if you speak to pollsters, they say this is terminal. I don't think anything's terminal, in the sense that you can always make a difference. The question is what sort of difference can this government make, and how can it do so?
OK. And I just wanted to say there, though, could he explain it away? The explanation has been lacking through being knocked off course, and now Liz through COVID. And I think we'll look at some more results, but I think we have to explain what's been going on and then get delivering.
Let's look at some of the other things. When it comes to the economic turmoil, 26% of people say global events outside the UK's control are to blame. 9% say it's down to energy companies, and 44% blame the government.
It's clear that there are external forces at work. We see inflation rising across the country, and we see across the world, and we see interest rates rising. And that's because of strong action by the Americans in raising interest rates. But it's also clear the government compounded that. It's also clear that the mini budget created the massive jump in interest rates that essentially have caused so much trouble.
And on police officers, 58% say our police should remain politically neutral, and only 16% say they should make political gestures like taking the knee. Does this mean people are fed up with virtue signalling?
Completely. The police have been taken over by progressive ideology. And again, the Conservatives need to move on this and prevent the police being essentially captured by one ideological wing.
And finally, on turnout, 10% of people say they definitely will not vote if there was a general election tomorrow, and 56% said they definitely would. Might turnout be a big issue at the next general election?
Look, the Tories won because Brexit activated a group of people who had never voted before. And that's what Trump did, that's what Brexit did. And they turned out again for Boris because they believed in him. The likely outcome is these people will not turn out and vote Conservative again. It's imperative that we create a state that works for them, and that requires investment and reform, and it's imperative we create the economic conditions that enables them to secure themselves. And for goodness sake, levelling up is the only way forward for this government on economic policy.
Delivery. Delivery, and time's running out now. Every day, new videos appear showing the heroism of Iranian people in standing up to the regime.
Challenging the Islamic Republic's legitimacy, protesters have burned pictures of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and chanted "Death to the dictator." They have faced down security forces using tear gas, clubs, and in many cases, live ammunition.
The unrest was triggered by the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old student who fell into a coma hours after being detained by morality police for allegedly breaking the strict law requiring women to cover their hair with a hijab or headscarf. She died in hospital just 3 days later.
The first protest took place in northwestern Iran, where Mahsa Amini was from, and then spread rapidly across the country.
Well, joining us now is Shahin Gabadi, spokesperson for the People's Mojahedin Organisation of Iran, an opposing opposition group. Thank you so much for joining us here. But I think it's to understand what has happened. I mean, how long has this dislike of the regime been there? How long has tensions been bubbling up? And now that the people are taking to the streets and saying, we do not want this kind of regime anymore.
Good day to you and your viewers. Actually, what we witness in Iran is a new revolution. This is a culmination of 40 years of corruption, repression, misogynist policy by this regime, and the people's resistance. Do not forget that over the years, more than 120,000 political dissidents have been executed by the Iranians from all walks of life. And now this has come to a head. And according to the information provided by the network of the People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran, the main Iranian resistance movement inside the country, there have been protests in 170 cities in all 31 provinces. And you see people from all walks of life, all age groups, young and old, all joining in, all rejecting the regime in its totality by slogans like "Death to Khamenei, the supreme leader," "Down with oppressor," being the Shah or the leader. So it's a new situation in Iran. You are facing a very different Iran. Obviously, the regime has come down with very, very heavy crackdown. According to the Mujahideen network, at least 400 protesters have been killed and more than 20,000 have been arrested. But despite this heavy crackdown, the protests continue. Now we are in the beginning of the 4th week. And as I said, there's no way going back. So this is a different Iran, and the Iranian people will not let down until this regime is overthrown. That's what they're demanding. It's very true that it began by the women rejecting the compulsory hijab and so on and so forth, but it has gone way beyond that. And the people's demands are, as I said, the end of this regime in its totality and establishing a democratic, re-elected republic in the country and a new dawn in Iran.
A chance that the regime could change tack and become more tolerant of these protesters and the women throwing off their clothing and things like that in order to... could the regime change in that way, or are they just going to get more and more brutal with the protesters?
Actually, this regime has no way back, no way out. I mean, this is the only thing they have known for the past 40 years, as I said. What you see today is the end of the road for this regime. They are not going to step back. The only thing they understand is brute force, and that's what has kept them in power. And that's exactly what we saw in the past 21 days. But what's more important, I think, Phil, here, is that there are many, many characters that distinguishes this round of uprising than the previous ones. First of all, it's nationwide. It has started from the big cities, namely Tehran and other metropolitans. You see middle class and poor people all joined together. You see the role of young people, particularly young women, who see a lot of times now lead the protests, and this is quite remarkable, who are very brave. And unlike previous times, you don't see people get pacified when they're attacked by the repressive forces, and they have shown tremendous courage in fighting back. And in all of that, I should add the role that the network of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran and the resistance units, which are affiliated to it, have played in the past few years, increasing the people's spirit of resistance to break this wall of repression. So, as I said, this is very different than what people have seen in the past. And I think it's about time for the international community in general, and the UK in particular, to come out.
Shaheen Gabadi.
Explicitly.
Shaheen, thank you. I'm sorry, we've got to move on. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. We do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And we salute the women who are fighting for their liberty.
And going back to some of your views when we were talking about indeterminate sentencing, I've got Sue here. The safety of the public overrules any and all emotional, physical and mental experience of the prisoner, full stop.
Kenny says, surely the answer is to give those offenders who commit serious sexual and violent crimes a life sentence, meaning life.
Yes, and Mike, the problem with prison is it's supposed to rehabilitate offenders, but prisoners don't have to prove that they have been rehabilitated before they leave prison. So maybe a longer sentence is the way forward, and that was Mike.
And Fred says it's not just the length of the sentence that's a concern. A lack of remand also needs to be addressed, especially for violent and sexual crimes. Thank you very much for your views.
So time now to take a look at the biggest stories from around the world of showbiz. And we're delighted to say we're joined in the studio by entertainment reporter Sarah Robertson. So, the biggest stories, what's been happening? I see there's a Daily Mail could be in a bit of a sticky situation.
That's correct, Esther. Well, President Biden says the world's facing Armageddon, so let's have some light showbiz relief. But yes, back to Prince Harry again, who just seems to dominate the headlines all the time these days. Prince Harry, Sir Elton John, David Furnish, Elizabeth Hurley are just some of the people who are suing Associated Newspapers, the publishing group behind the Daily Mail, Mail Online, for what they say is bugging, impersonation and accessing bank accounts. Associated, their lawyers have hit back, strongly refuted the claims, said they're preposterous, completely, they don't know where this has come from. But anyway, this is what's happening. They've called it preposterous smears. And Prince Harry has had form, obviously, with Associated before. He has sued them in the past for... Successfully as well, for things which he says is incorrect. Would like to say that I worked for Associated for a long time, and I have never seen any of the things that these people are claiming. And I was quite shocked as well to see Baroness Doreen Lawrence also in the mix, because when Paul Dacre was editor of the Daily Mail, back at the terrible tragedy of Stephen Lawrence, it was Dacre who was the only editor who took the decision, the very, very brave decision, to name the murderers of Stephen Lawrence and gave Doreen such support. So that's my take on that.
So this is heading to court then, it looks like. This could be the biggest court case of
it might get thrown out. At the moment, this is just obviously, they've obviously put this claim in. So we shall see what's happened. But don't see where they could get the proof from this, because it's just unsubstantiated. Right, on to the next. So that was the serious stuff. Let's get on to I'm a Celebrity. So yes, we've got some new names coming out. Sean Walsh, comedian. He was at the time castigated when he was in Strictly 4 years ago, Strictly Come Dancing, for sharing a kiss with the professional dancer Katya Jones. It ended her marriage to Neil Jones, professional, and it also ended Sean's relationship. I'm a Celeb have absolutely done a blinder bagging him, because they're really hoping that he's going to open up all about this kiss and what went on around the campfire, because he's never really spoken about it before. He's alluded to it in his comedy acts, but never actually spoken about it in depth. So by signing him up, they're expecting something's going to come, from this.
All the gossip.
And they've also got Boy George going up, which is a brilliant signing.
Yes.
I mean, he will just be TV gold, will he not? I mean, Boy George, imagine him having to do, the eating tasks, eating the spiders, or... He's such a diva, or having to, jump in with creepy crawlies.
He's got quick repartee as well, hasn't he? He can be cutting, he can be funny. Let's hope he does some singing. I'll be watching.
Oh, I can't wait to see him, because anyone that tries to say anything to him, if he gets people moaning at him, going, oh, you're not pulling your weight, he will just come back with those riposts.
God rest his soul, but when Pete Burns was on, and how wonderful and what a sparkling wit he had.
Exactly. So I think they've got some great signings going into I'm a Celebrity. It's going to be really good this year. I can't wait. And it's back in Australia as well. So we're getting the real I'm a Celebrity
and a
experience.
Eurovision?
Yes. Eurovision. This is the story I'm most excited about. I'm a huge Eurovision fan. Tonight, Graham Norton, Eurovision host, he is going to be revealing on the One Show who is going to be the host city. Is it going to be Liverpool?
Yes.
Or is it going to be Glasgow? So he doesn't know. Nobody knows apart from the organisers. Tonight is going to be the big reveal. This is when we're going to find out from Graham.
I'll have opened the bottle in advance, just so that I'm not going to be disappointed and then don't open it at all.
You're going to have bias there.
Who's your money on, Sarah?
Oh, I really want it to be Glasgow. I'm so sorry, Esther.
And
the only reason
controversial
is, I lived in Glasgow for a long time, so I do. It does hold a special place in my heart. But also, I think it would be nice for Scotland, just to have that union again. It's sort of a bit of a uniting force, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you think about it.
I have to say, it's nothing what you said there, and it certainly was because you didn't back Liverpool, but we're going to have to end the show on that note, Sarah. Thank you very much indeed.
Philip, thank you for joining us through the show. I don't know if you're an I'm a Celebrity fan or a Eurovision song, but thank you for joining us on the show today.
Now, that's all we've got time for, but don't go anywhere, and we'll be back the same time next week. Next is weather.
Given from the Met Office. A brief spell of heavy rain is crossing the country at the moment, accompanied by gusty winds with some lively showers following. This is the weather front that is causing the heavy rain. It's a cold front and marked temperature difference actually from the front of the front to the back of the front, and as that crosses the country we will see this spell of heavy rain accompanied by some lively winds. That's moving into the Midlands, into parts of Wales through the early part of the afternoon. Ahead of it, it is breezy, but that breeze coming up from the southwest. So it's relatively warm across East Anglia in the southeast, 18, 19 Celsius, but much cooler air into Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England and North Wales by the end of the afternoon. Lively showers here. Some brighter spells, but where we see the showers coming through, they will be heavy with gusty winds. The rain sweeps southeast then through the evening, and then once it clears, actually for many it's drier, it's clearer overnight with lighter winds as well. Still a few showers into the north and the northwest, but where we see breaks in the cloud, temperatures falling away. We're looking at the mid to low single figures in some sheltered spots by dawn. But a bright start for many on Saturday. Plenty of sunshine out there through the morning. There'll still be